Alright guys, I've got the Define Mini C build here in my kitchen because it is time to drain out the Aurora fluid. It's actually probably a little bit past due, but as many of you may know already, this fluid unfortunately is not meant to be run in the system for longer, probably than a couple weeks. That silver stuff does start building up inside the loop. So right now I'm going to drain this out. I'm going to have to flush it a few times, probably actually like 4 times, and then we're going to refill with a new fluid. I'm actually going to try and match the bright blue color on the cabling, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the process here of what it takes to drain this loop, how to flush it, and then what we kind of do to fill it back up. Okay, so looking around the back here, the first thing that I need to do is go through and I need to pull the cables out of the way. I need to try and disconnect as many of the main cables as I can, just to get them out of harm's way. Now, I'm not actually going to be powering the pump on and off with the power supply that's in here. I'm going to be using an external power supply, which is very important for a couple reasons. One, if we happen to get any rogue fluid coming out somewhere, it's much more likely to get into this power supply than it would be one setting off to the side. So there's less of a chance of fluid getting into something that's powered on. And the other thing is that I don't like clicking this power supply on and off, especially if there's still things plugged in, because you can build up charges in places. So it's much safer just to use an external power supply to cycle your pump. That's a good sort of habit to get into anytime you're doing custom water cooling builds. But yeah, so I'll kind of show you that here when we get to that point. All right, guys, so I've got my cables out of the way. Some of them here I just sort of velcroed up and out of the way. I did completely remove some of them, but as you can see now, I've got nice open access between the power supply and the pump and the drain port here. So I've got the case tipped on its front. The reason that is because since the reservoir is mounted horizontally, that's what I have to do in order to fill and flush it. So here I've just got a piece of flex tube that's just going to spit the stuff out into the sink. If this were a scenario where you were actually reusing the fluid, like let's say for instance you found a small leak, you wanted to drain enough fluid out to be able to fix that, and you didn't want to waste the fluid, you could easily just drain this into like a jug and then reuse it. And then as we come up here to address one of the most asked questions I got when people first saw this build was how I fill the loop. So here's the actual top of the reservoir. It's butted right up to the back of the case. And all I did was simply, you can sort of see it here. The pieces of metal that run between these PCIe slot covers, I just cut that off. And then now when I remove these, I have access to this port here on the reservoir. Now I always attach a short piece of flex tube just as a fail-safe, especially if you get into a scenario where you have to sort of maneuver the case and tip it around to get air to move around. This buys you a little bit of extra space to make sure you don't accidentally dump fluid out of that port there. It is very important, and this is just simple physics. You have to make sure that you open up the reservoir, or somewhere in the loop has to open up to allow air to move in, and then push the fluid out through the drain port. So if you try to drain your loop and you just simply open up the drain port without allowing air to move into the loop, you'll get a little bit that'll trickle out, and that'll be it. It's just going to be trapped in there. So that's kind of what we got going on here. So the next step is I need to start draining the fluid out. All right, so I kind of rotated the case a little bit so you guys could kind of see what's going on here. So obviously from this angle you can see the case is tipped sideways. Now I've got my external power supply hooked up here. Now in order to power these on, you guys do need to make sure you put the little jumpers in the 24 pin. Otherwise when you click the on switch it's not going to do anything. And then I just have the one single Molex plugged into my pump power here. So again, I touched on this before, but another huge advantage to having this powered externally is nothing in the system is going to have power going to it. So if you were to have a mishap, and it does happen, from time to time, where maybe you get a little bit of fluid or water that splashes somewhere, if it does get onto any of your components, you don't need to panic. As long as there's no power going to anything, all you need to make sure of is that you get everything perfectly dry before you power the system back on. You should have zero issues. Obviously you want to be as careful as possible. You don't want to run the risk of any water getting into a small space where it'd be difficult to get out. But again, one of the ideas behind using an external power supply is it just gives you one more point of safety where you're not going to have to worry about moisture getting onto the board. Okay, so one more thing I want to touch on when it comes to draining the loop here is if we were draining this with the intent of completely draining the loop to disassemble it, you would drain this totally out and you would fight this thing for a while, moving it around in different ways, moving air around, trying to get the fluid moved out of the system. Unfortunately, it's kind of a pain in the ass when you have a complicated loop like this. When it does come time to completely drain the thing out, that's one of the disadvantages of having one of these complicated loops. However, since I am just trying to flush the loop and refill it, what I want to do is when I open up my drain valve, I want to let the reservoir empty all the way down, and then I want to stop it before it gets to the pump. I want to keep the pump primed so that I can fill this reservoir up with distilled water, kick the pump on, it will already be primed, it'll push that water through the system, and then I will do the same thing over and over again. Eventually I will push the majority of this fluid out of the system. Now, the good news is that we're still sticking with a blue color here, so I don't have to worry about getting this system like perfectly flushed and clear. And to be honest, it would be difficult to do to get all this Aurora out of here. Even though we're flushing this Aurora is still going to be attached to places. It's going to be inside the tubes, any little nook and cranny. That is one of the disadvantages of the Aurora fluid. It's not going to be a big deal as long as we get the majority of it out. That's all that matters, to where it's not going to build up over time. But I would never be able to get this crystal clear again. I would have to disassemble the whole entire thing and clean it by hand. But we're just trying to get the majority of it out to get a little bit more longevity into the system. Once we put the new fluid in, the new fluid should be good for probably a year to a year and a half, so we won't have to worry about doing this again. Alright, so guys, you can just pick up distilled water at the grocery store. It comes in gallon jugs. It's like less than $1. But what I do is I just pour some into a glass. I mean, there's no real rule on how you're supposed to do this. And then I use one of these syringe guys. You can order these, or I actually bought this in the water cooling aisle at Micro Center, but I don't like taking any chances with pouring water in funnels. To me, that's just a little bit too reckless. So using a syringe allows you to really control, what your water's doing. And then you want to keep paper towels, lots of paper towels handy just in case. And then just take it up here. Now that I've got this drained down, I'm just going to sit here and fill it back up. Obviously, before you do this, you want to make sure that you've shut your valve on your drain port, and then you just fill it back up. So after draining the reservoir here, I've just filled it with distilled water. The next step here is to cycle on the pump, let that flush through the system, drain it out again, and then I'm just basically going to do that over and over again until I feel like I've gotten the loop flushed well enough. Another important thing that I didn't mention, but I maybe should say something, make sure you're using distilled water. Don't put tap water in here. There's minerals in the tap water that can react with the metals that are inside your loop, so make sure you're using distilled water to flush your system. I'm just kind of letting this flush through for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. And then again, you know, as you do this over and over again, you'll start to see less and less of this fluid in here. It's obviously going to get lighter and it's going to look closer to water eventually. I'm guessing I'll probably have to do this maybe 4 or 5 times to get it flushed out as well as I want it to be. And then I should be able to start to refill the loop. Alright guys, so I am on flush number 5 right now. As you can see, the water is diluted the fluid quite a bit. It's almost clear. It's got a little bit of a blue tint to it. But the key factor here is that I can still see quite a bit of the silver stuff swirling around in here. So I'm going to keep flushing this until I feel that enough of that is you know, escaped out of the system. You know, due to the size of the reservoir and the fact that I'm trying to keep the pump primed, I mean, I'm only really able to introduce about 12 ounces of distilled water into the loop at a time and then push it through. So unfortunately, this is just kind of a step that you have to go through. It's really not that difficult, just a little bit time consuming, but all in all, you know, from start to finish, you know, this project isn't really that bad. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys what it looks like when you're about, I don't know, let's call it halfway through the process here. Alright, so I pretty much have this where I want it to be. I think I flushed it a total of 8, possibly 9 times. I kind of lost track. There's still a little hint of the silver flake in there. The fluid's not totally clear. There's a very, very slight tint of blue, but again, I'm going back in with blue fluid, so that's not really going to be a problem. So what I'm going to do is, I've got the loop completely filled with just distilled water. Now I'm going to add Mayhems Pastel Extreme to the loop. I'm going to cycle it through. It's pretty much going to look white at that point. And then I'm going to slowly add drops of blue dye to try and get this bright blue color that is on the sleeving. That color would not really be achievable in a translucent fluid. You kind of have to go into a white base. One of the nice things about using Mayhems Pastel Extreme is it actually is a nano fluid, so there's a lot of benefits to adding that to the loop as far as longevity of the fluid is concerned, and then you get that opaque look to your fluid as well. So in normal circumstances, if I were to be, you know, putting fluid in this for the first time, I would probably pre-mix the fluid before I added it, just to kind of gauge the color a little bit better. But in this circumstance, since I already have this loop filled with distilled water, I'm just simply going to add it, cycle it through, and then slowly add the drops of blue until I get this system to look to be the color that I want. Alright guys, so she's finished, and first off I just want to say I did not get the color that I was hoping for. Turns out the blue dye is a little bit further towards the purple spectrum than the green. Now this is a perfect example of had I pre-mixed my dye and my colors outside first, I could have experimented with mixing some different stuff and probably gotten closer to this. Also, I think that the Aurora, or not the Aurora, the pastel that I added just wasn't an intense enough white to brighten up the fluid. So, needless to say, I'm actually really happy with the color. It's a very deep, vibrant blue. I don't know how well it shows up on camera. The thing is this with this older Asus board, there's like 3 different colors of blue on it, so none of the blue colors ever really matched anyway. So it's not the worst thing in the world. But at the end of the day, mission accomplished. The Aurora is mostly flushed, and we have a coolant now that we should be good to use for a long time without having to worry about it. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. If you guys have any other questions, or there's anything that I forgot to mention, feel free to leave a comment. If you guys want to see more videos like this in the future, let me know. I'd like to be able to show you guys some more of these. For lack of a better term, we'll call it a tutorial. But just some of the stuff that's involved when it comes to doing custom water cooling loops. So again, I appreciate you guys checking out the video. Thanks for sticking around, and I will see you guys in the next video.